Hello, everybody, and welcome to the day. My name is Mr. Martin, and I'm going to be your host for just a few minutes as I walk you through how to write your continuity and changes over time essay. So there are four parts to what we're going to be doing today. First of all, we're going to be looking at the structure of your essay, sort of like how it should be ordered and what are the components of your essay. Then we're going to talk about how to write a continuity paragraph in particular. You're going to see that it's very similar to writing a change paragraph, and we'll be using the same sort of example as we did before. We're also going to look at how to write an intro. There are two parts to that intro: introducing the topic and then making your claim or your thesis statement. And then also we will be working on the conclusion, and then we're going to be done. So the first thing that we're going to want to think about as we are going into essay writing is how to organize or structure that essay. So you've looked at two changes over the last few weeks and one continuity, and each of those is going to be its own paragraph, because that's how you structure a CCOT essay. Is you're going to have each one of those changes is its own paragraph. So the paragraphs are like topics. So you don't like talk about all of the changes in one paragraph and all of the continuities in another paragraph. Each one gets its own topic. And so what we're going to see in a sort of 5-paragraph essay format is an introduction. You're going to have your first change paragraph, your second change paragraph, your continuity paragraph, and then your conclusions. And then your two change paragraphs really should already be written. You can just simply go back to the assessment. We've opened those back up so you can see how you did on that question. And all you have to do is copy that and paste it, and maybe make any changes if you don't feel like it is as strong as you'd like it to be for the final essay. And then you're going to be writing your continuity paragraph. You could basically be doing that at any point, and then you'll be turning this in by next Friday. So I'm not quite sure how I was able to make this slide so hideous, but looking at it here as I'm recording this and talking about it, the color scheme here is truly terrible, and I just want to apologize for that right now. But this slide is all about how to write your continuity paragraph. And what we see is that from the basic structure is that it's the same as writing the change paragraph. You really have 4 different things that you want to do in your continuity paragraph. So the first thing is identify the continuity. What is the thing that has stayed the same over this period of time? And then you want to describe it. What evidence is there that it was the same at the beginning and at the end of the era? Now, of course, we've been using maps a lot because this has really been a not only a geography or not only a demographic study, but also a geographic study, because we've been looking at the city itself and how these changes people have moved, people have stayed in the same kind of spot. And so what you need to do again for that second one is describe what it was like at the beginning, and then what it was like at the end, and how that shows that it has basically remained essentially the same. Number 3, what it allows for the continuity. This is the why, or what causes the continuity to persist over time. What are the factors that are going to allow it to stay the same? And then the 4th piece is you're going to analyze that continuity. So that's 1 or 2 more sentences where you say, this is a very significant continuity, and then you say why it is. Or you say that maybe within this continuity, within this thing kind of staying the same, there are these minor changes that we see over time. And then you can also talk about, is this continuity part of a larger or bigger process? That could be going on either in that place, like in the state, for example, or in the country, or global processes. What are some factors that are influencing this thing staying the same? And so if we look back to the change paragraph that we were written, I gave this example of an ice cream cone and how over time we see the ice cream changing. And in this case, the change is that it changes shape. I describe what it looked like at the beginning. I describe what it looks like at the end. And then I say why this change happens. And then maybe I'll do a little bit more analysis of that change. But in this case, we're going to not be talking about a change, but rather we're going to be talking about a continuity, which is going to look something like this. You have these 2 ice cream cones, and they are exactly the same. So over time, for some reason, these ones have remained the same. And so you would again identify this as a continuity, that these 2 ice creams are exactly the same. And then what you would do is you would describe the fact that it looks delicious and cold, and you know, like ice cream is supposed to look, I guess. And then we're going to say why it persists. So maybe you might have a reason like, well, the room was really cold. And so because of that, over the course of 10 minutes, if that's the time period, then the ice cream is not going to be melty. It's going to remain the same because this picture was taken, say, in December or something. And so that's why it's going to remain the same. So, you know, it's the same kind of thinking as far as, you know, identifying it, describing it, and then saying why it happens. You're basically doing the same thing, just you're going to be talking about how they're the same instead of how they change. So now that we know how to write a continuity paragraph, and we kind of already have had some practice with that, now we're going to focus in on the introduction paragraph, the introductory paragraph of your essay. And there's two main things that you're going to do with your intro. You're going to be introing the topic, so what are we talking about here? And then the second piece is you're going to be making a claim. And so really the claim is something very specific that I'll get into in just a second. But I want you to think about the fact that, you know, your reader, as they're going to the essay, pretend like they've never heard about this topic before, they know nothing about it. And so what you're doing is you're really introducing this new topic to somebody that may have never been exposed to this topic before. And so that's why you really need to let them know what it is that we're talking about and why any of this matters. So that's what we're going to be doing in the introductory essay, as well as to some extent in the conclusion also. All right, so this is kind of a text heavy slide, but just stay with me for a second. So when we're introducing the topic, here is where we say what it is that we're going to be talking about. So what is it that we're talking about? Well, let's look at the prompt to understand how we should introduce the topic. And the prompt says, analyze the continuities and changes in the demographic makeup of Seattle from 1920 to 1960. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about demographics. And so, but where are we talking about? We're talking about the demographics in Seattle. And then the other question is, well, when are we talking about it? We're talking about demographics in Seattle from 1920 to 1960. But how do you take that and make it something that's interesting and introducing the topic? Well, one way that you can do that is by defining the what, okay? And so what are demographics and why do they matter? And we talked about that a little bit earlier in this unit when we were essentially defining what demographics are. And we said how demographics are used, or sort of what role they play in our understanding a particular place or a particular time. So just do that. Tell me what demographics are and tell me why demographics matter or how they're used. And then the next, tell me that this what is something that shows us what Seattle was like over the course of this time. So what are demographics? Why do they matter? And then tell us that they're important for understanding Seattle in a particular period of time. Because then what you're also doing is you're telling us the when and the where, and that demographics and Seattle and this time period are all connected together. So that's how you're just merely introducing the topic, because again, your reader might not know what you're going to be talking about. And so this is simply introducing them to this topic before you start making any sort of like claims about the topic, which we're then going to move on to your thesis or your claim. Now, what I want to say here is that I think that thesis writing and claim writing is fairly easy. Please also note that I've always said thesis when I'm teaching this, because in some essay writing you might call it a thesis. It's also your claim. This is where you're making some sort of claim. Now, this thesis is going to have 3 parts to it. So remember that this is a continuity and changes over time essay. And so the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to tell me 2 ways that Seattle has changed in a single sentence, because this is going to be the roadmap, the driver for the rest of your essay. So you can tell me that 2 ways that Seattle changed from 1920 to 1960 is A and B. So you give me those 2 ways that you've already learned how Seattle demographics have changed. And you can just stop that sentence right there. Put a period on it. That's the first part of your thesis or your claim. Next, I want you to tell me, however, one way that Seattle has stayed the same over the course of this time period is blank. And so it can be its own single sentence where you're giving me the flip side of this, that while it has changed in those other 2 ways, in this way, it has remained the same. And then finally, I want you to tell me whether Seattle has changed more or if it has stayed the same more. Is it more changey or is it more samey? And which seems to be like more significant. So overall, Seattle has changed more than it has stayed the same, or overall, Seattle has stayed the same more than it has changed. So you have to decide whether you think that the continuity that you saw is more significant, or whether the two changes that you saw in the city of Seattle's demographics are more significant. So this is why it's a claim. You're claiming something, and you're going to back that up with some evidence. Okay, so that's why it's this should be pretty easy. You're just kind of like taking the major components of your essay and you're combining them all into anywhere from 1 to 3 sentences. And I don't want you to get, it's not like 1 sentence is better or 3 sentences is better. Just figure out what feels the most natural when you're talking about it, because the important thing here when you're making your claim is that you're clear. So there are ways to do it, like I said, in 1 sentence. Don't worry too much about that. Just be clear on your claim, because that's an important part of your essay, because it's going to be the roadmap for it. And finally, the conclusion. This is where we sort of just like wrap everything up. And there's a couple of components that I want you to have in your conclusion. I want you to tell me again what it is that we're talking about and what your claim is. And it, you have these sort of ways to do that, like, so as you can see, so those sort of phrases to start your conclusion. But again, illustrate that demographics are important, that they're what we're talking about, and that they tell us something about Seattle, and that they tell us specifically that Seattle is more changey or that Seattle is more samey. And then what I want you to do is to tell me how all of this might fit into a broader context. What I mean by this is, tell me that is this only something that happens in Seattle, or is this something that it happens in other places? Is this caused by larger global forces? Is this a pattern that we see? It's very similar to the analysis that you do in the paragraph. So if in your analysis you don't talk about sort of broader contexts that that cause this, then you can do that here. I know that we say, what caused this to happen. And so for example, in the Japanese internment paragraph, you might have talked about how this was caused by Executive Order 9066. And so you've already kind of hit on the global thing, because World War II, Pearl Harbor, Executive Order 9066, you might have already addressed those topics in that earlier paragraph. But what you can talk about is that there's a larger history of oppression and discrimination against Asian Americans and Asian immigrants into this country. So that's that sort of like larger thing that you can talk about here, that all of these demographic changes and continuities are caused by these very specific things, like war and oppression, or generally like the movement of people, or because of that discrimination that we were talking about that was happening all over the country. So that is what your conclusion is. Again, kind of remind me what we're talking about and what you think about it, and then tell me how this fits into a larger picture. And that is it. Not only are we putting a bow on this essay, but I think we're kind of putting a bow on the year as well. We had to take this pretty slow, so that's why we weren't able to do some more stuff with this unit. But I hope that you are taking some confidence in writing away from this process, and a little bit of understanding about the city in which you live. So this is going to be the last video thing where I'm talking with you. Thank you so much for bearing with me through these as I'm learning how to use them. And I hope that I get to see you before the end of the year. Good luck writing your essay. Please feel free to email your teacher if there are any questions about how to write the essay. I know that sometimes writing can be kind of daunting. And yeah, have a great summer, you guys. And hopefully we will see you in the near future. Bye now.